culture. Milton came from a culture where Christianity was predominant, and writing about Christianity to a Christian culture meant that the people around already know about what he's writing. What epic convention he is talking about here, or he's using over here, is this convention of telling a story which the people of his times and of the place that he is in are already aware. The next slide, as you will see, tells us of another epic convention, which is in media res, as it is called in Latin, beginning the story in the middle. It is a convention in which the story begins not from the beginning, but from the middle. And then you are led back and forth in time and shown how what happened before and what is going to happen next. So this kind of thing happens in Milton's Paradise Lost as well. This convention is used where Milton begins the story in the middle and not from the beginning. He doesn't start by telling us about how God created the world out of chaos. He starts by taking us directly straight to pandemonium. He starts by talking about the devils in the hell that they are, and how these devils are discussing what to do to obstruct God's plan. This is the middle of the story, because before this, God has already finished the creation of the world. God has already created Adam and Eve and paradise. In fact, God has also finished creating the angels and the devils. And these devils, who were actually originally angels, have fallen from heaven or have been removed from heaven simply because of their sin of pride, because they wanted to rebel against God. So the story begins with pandemonium, which is actually the middle of the creation myth. And this creation myth then continues with the disobedience and the fall, as we call it. Adam and Eve being removed from Eden is known in English as the fall. We have the next slide then, which shows you the fourth epic convention. And this is introducing a list of characters who play a major role in the story. They may speak at some length right in the beginning of the epic. Now, this list of characters is introduced at the beginning. So soon after Milton talks about pandemonium, he introduces the characters in hell right at the beginning. He talks about Lucifer, and then he talks about all the other fallen angels, Beelzebub, Mammon, and all the other fallen angels who are now devils and who are in Satan's hell together with Satan. So this convention of introducing the characters right at the beginning is another convention used by Milton. And then we have the fifth convention of epic poetry, which is also used by Milton, as you can see on the slide. This convention is the conflict between people or between personalities in the heavenly realm. This is a conflict in the celestial or the heavenly area. There are divine beings who fight against each other. And in the epics of Homer and Virgil, also we have this particular idea, this convention, which is used. In Paradise Lost, this happens on a grand scale, on a large scale, where we have Satan at war with God. In Paradise Lost, Milton also talks about, or also writes, in fact, a whole series of lines about the war between the battle between the angels and the devils. He writes in detail about how Satan plots and plans and has meetings with his other fellow devils in order to make a move or make some kind of agitation or rebellion against God. On the other hand, we also have God calling his angels and telling them to be careful when Satan enters paradise. We have the angel Uriel, who finds out that Satan has entered paradise and calls all the other angels who are looking after paradise to be careful. So, this kind of plotting and scheming and fighting among the divine beings is an epic convention which Milton follows in this epic. And we have the last convention which is used by Milton, as you can see on the slide, the use of dramatic irony. What is dramatic irony? Dramatic irony is a literary device in which a character in a story fails to see or understand what is obvious to the audience or the readers. Dramatic irony appears frequently in the plays of the Greeks. In Paradise Lost, dramatic irony occurs, for example, when Adam and Eve go happily about in their daily life in the Garden of Eden, unaware that there is a devil who is waiting behind the scenes, unaware that Satan has taken the form of the serpent. And they are unaware also that they will finally give in to the temptation offered by Satan. So these are the things that, because people already know about the story of the creation, people are aware that this will happen. However, the characters themselves are not aware that this is going to happen. So the audiences or the readers are aware of the outcome, but the characters in the epic are not aware of this. And it is this use of dramatic irony that is an epic convention used by Milton in Paradise Lost. Another example in which Milton uses dramatic irony is when Satan and his followers believe that they have succeeded. Now, people who, as I said, Milton comes from a Christian culture. In fact, Milton was a very staunch Protestant. And in this culture, people are aware that Satan can never succeed. In fact, Satan has already failed because God has already promised to send his son to redeem the world. Now, Satan is not aware of this. Satan thinks that he has won the battle, whereas actually, in reality, it is God who always wins. And this is dramatic irony because Satan does not understand what the outcome of his actions is. The people, the audience, or Milton's readers who come from the Christian culture would understand that the outcome will always be redemption because God loves the world, whereas Satan believes that the outcome is destruction because Satan has succeeded. So dramatic irony then is the epic convention in which the characters themselves do not know what is the outcome of their actions, but the readers or the people who are watching the action, they know what is the outcome of the action. These were the 6 epic conventions that Milton uses in Paradise Lost.
Ma'am, you have explained the epic conventions wonderfully. But the Paradise Lost or any discussion on Paradise Lost does not end without some of the unforgettable quotes. So many people at so many places quote so many quotations from the various books of English literature. Can you provide us or can we make our students familiar with some of the important unforgettable quotes from Paradise Lost?
Yes, I have some of them on the slides. These are unforgettable quotes, as I said, because as you were told in the introduction, Milton is perhaps one of the most important poets in English literature, and it is important to remember some of the lines that he has written in Paradise Lost, because these lines are used as references and quotations in many other texts. So students who are reading or studying Paradise Lost must remember that quotations from Paradise Lost will appear at other places also. And if not quotations, then definitely references to Paradise Lost will always appear in other works that come from a similar area, from a similar genre. Now, the first quote that I want to bring to you, students, from this text, Paradise Lost, is on the slide, as you will see. This is the beginning of Paradise Lost, and the quote goes like this: of man's first disobedience and the fruit of that forbidden tree, whose mortal taste brought death into the world and all our woe, with loss of Eden, till one greater man restore us and regain the blissful seat, sing, heavenly muse. Now, this is the quote which, as I told you earlier, introduces the invocation to the muse. It is the beginning. The book begins with an invocation to the muse. You can see the last line of this quote: sing, heavenly muse. So Milton is requesting his muse to sing through him. It is the muse who inspires Milton to write this epic. The muse, when I talk about the muse, I mean a divine source of inspiration, something that comes from God, something that is divinely sent into the writer so that he can write as per what God wants him to write. When Milton writes the epic, or when any writer writes the epic, the writer is convinced that whatever he or she is writing comes from a divine source. It is not human, it is not man made, it is divine. And this is what we see in this first quote, when Milton invokes the divine muse. In the next slide, we have two lines which are spoken by Satan. And these lines go thus: the mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell and a hell of heaven. And then there is another line which is also spoken by Satan, which says, better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. Now, both these lines again are very, very important lines. They will be seen in many places, in many literary works, even today. And these lines are spoken when the great war of the angels has been settled and Satan and the other demons have been cast into hell. Satan is lamenting his loss and beginning to realize that he will be in hell for a very long time. At this point in the narrative, Satan is still licking his wounds, so to speak, and not seriously considering revenge. Instead, he is deciding how to make the best of the situation. And it is a few lines later that he first utters this famous phrase, the second quote that is there on your screen right now: better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. So what Satan, when the war or when the battle between the angels and the devils took place, at that time, of course, obviously the devils were defeated. Satan and his army were defeated by the angels and their army. And at this time, when Satan has gone back into his pandemonium, into his area, into his territory, he sits there and wonders about what to do next. He doesn't really want to take a lot of effort and energy in order to to fight against God anymore, but he is wondering now what should his action be. And that is when he realizes that his next territory for war, his next battleground, will not be a field, it will not be a war, but it will be the mind. It is the mind that can be made into a hell or a heaven. And it is because of this idea that he decides to go and tempt Adam and Eve into eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge, because this is how he can enter the mind of Adam and Eve and thus enter the minds of human beings. So heaven or hell can be anywhere. It's not only a place that we are talking about, it is a state of mind. And this is Milton's greatness. Milton begins by writing about heaven and hell as actual places, but it is over here that he lifts the epic from reality into symbolism. He starts using heaven and hell over here as symbols of states of mind, not of places. And the second line that I just mentioned that you must remember, students, always is this line of better to reign in heaven, better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. Satan tries to make peace with his own condition. He tries to think, or he tries to convince himself first, that it is better that he is the king of hell rather than be a servant in heaven. And it is this line that shows Satan's sin of pride, Satan's sin of rebellion. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. The next slide we have is a quotation that is taken when God explains in book 3 that he has created man sufficient to have stood but free to fall. Now, this line indicates Milton's Christian belief that human beings have been given complete freedom of will. If they commit a sin and if they fall, it is because of their own doing, not because of God's wish, but because human beings have chosen to do so. I told you earlier about the concept of free will, and it is this concept that you can see in these lines. In the next slide, you have lines that are written after the act of disobedience. When Adam and Eve are to be punished, not only Eve but all women are punished with pain and childbirth, and God the Son explains it thus: To thy husband's will thine shall submit, he over thee shall rule. And in the next quotation, he says, till thou return. Can we have the slide, please, again? Till thou return